Hi, and welcome to the Athletic Shoulder podcast powered by Informed Performance. And this is a slightly different show today. We've got Richie Gray on the show. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you, Richie. Welcome on board, mate.
Listen, thanks, Ben. Obviously, we first met, I think, we knew about each other for many, many years. I would think possibly 5-10 years we've kind of known that we're both in the same space. But great to catch up with you last year in Orlando, where we were both speaking at the NFL Health and Safety Summit down there. And I think on the back of that, obviously, we've been in touch pretty much weekly since then.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's great, isn't it, that, you know, two people are doing things separately, but when you bring them together, all of a sudden there's a massive synergy.
yeah. Well, it just seemed obvious based on some of the discussions there around the relationship, and what we've both been doing. We were both out in that conference, and one of the things that struck me when I was watching you present was the technical coaching side of it. And at that time, I was already looking for people who could help us bridge the gap between physical preparation and then bringing in really good technical coaching to help us navigate that difficult piece, which is often returning an athlete back with a shoulder injury back to performance. We're by our own admission not experts in the technical aspect, the coaching side, especially around on field. So it was really obvious to see with what you presented that
Yeah, and I think it works both ways, Ben, because I remember, if you remember what I said at that conference in front of, all the NFL, performance personnel that were there, was about 500 plus people. I'm not a medic, I've not been brought up as a physiotherapist, I'm not an athletic trainer, and you've got to sort of stay in your lane, as they say. And so I'm exactly the same as you. You're looking at from the technical side, I could do with more input there. And I'm always wanting to learn more about the other side of my players, and I think for me, especially over the last 10 years, I've been asked more and more when I'm in facilities and when I'm in buildings working on the technical aspects with the coaches, all of a sudden I'll have an athletic trainer or a physio come up to me and say, would you mind just helping me out for the next hour and a half? I'm bringing a player back from, say, for example, a shoulder injury. Is there anything that I could do to make sure that he's ahead of the game when he comes back? And then it sort of dawned on me that I think we've all been working in our silos for years. We're a lot better now. But years ago, the medics and the athletic trainers were stuck in that room. The strength conditioners were in, their world, and you had the coaches in theirs, and very little connection between the three, And I think now, it's a far better partnership with all the groups. Everybody knew, hang on a minute here, if we all work together, we can be a lot more, benefit to the player, and that's the key here. So, on meeting yourself, Ben, and, we've had many discussions since then, I get asked a lot to work with physios, athletic trainers, bringing players back, and it's a £1 million, £1 billion business. If you look at American sport, our own sport, a rugby union, rugby league's the same. It's costing teams a lot of money when players are not on the field. It's as simple as that. And, you think back to how players were rehabbed, you just about cringe because they were never ready to actually go back and perform. They were ready to walk around and, yeah, it's feeling okay, coach. Yeah, I think it'll be all right,
yeah,
And it was a recipe for disaster. And then all of a sudden, 2-3 weeks later, the player was back on the sidelines again. So I think it's absolutely key that when we bring players back, and I always say this, they're in a better position than they were when they were injured. Mentally, physically, they're in a better position. And for me, I want them more technically accurate than they were when they were injured, because usually it's the technical accuracy part that got them injured in the first place. So the key for me is bringing them back more technically accurate than when they were injured. And that's where you can't do it on your own. You have to do it together. And that's why you and I have got together. And, it's been a great partnership.
Yeah, and I think that sort of comes back. You know, we're dealing in contact collision sport here. It's a risky business, and um, we're trying to build confidence in the players, the coaches, that they're going to be able to tolerate the demands of the game. And one of the reasons I was out there in Orlando was because I'd been volunteering on the NFL shoulder injury task force, and there's some real clarity now worldwide on the types of injuries that people are sustaining and also the mechanisms that those injuries are occurring in. You know, the tackle being a significant area
Yeah,
of a problem that, you know, that needs addressing. And some really good little pockets of work and research have been done, but bringing it all together into a framework is a thing. I think the thing that hasn't been done or hasn't been put out there in the public
yeah,
domain. You know, so
yeah,
that for me is it. And I mean, when you consider the types of injuries that we're dealing with here, we're dealing with impact collision type injuries, so AC joint injuries. We're dealing with shoulder instabilities in, you know, DBs, in, you know, in tackling in rugby. We're dealing with specific injuries to certain groups like offensive linemen, more posterior instabilities just because of the nature and the demands of their sport. So we can't just go, let's focus on tackling. We can't just prepare them for one thing. We've got to really try and prepare them for the chaos that we
yeah.
see in collision sport.
Yeah, I think to go back to your point, there's some brilliant work done research wise, and we've both been involved with universities and some very, very clever people who have created some phenomenal documents and have found some incredible things to do with, let's call it contact and collision sports. But the biggest problem is they sometimes can't then be simplified to bring them down onto the grass, you know? And I've always said that over the last 10 years, I've seen some great work done, but it pretty much remains in a research document or in a book, you know. And what you're trying to do is take the most important parts that have been found and researched. So, you know, it's the truth. They've been well looked at. It's not some whim that you've taken out of your head and gone, oh, yeah, I think this might work. It's actually been shown to make a difference. And the key, I think, for all of us is to get them onto the grass as quick as possible. And when I say on the grass, it's get them to our players. You know, they're the key people. The players here are the most important. And I was always asked years ago, you know, why do you coach? You coach to make players better. It's as simple as that. That's possibly now grown to making players and coaches better because of the world that you're in. And now it's possibly players, coaches, and the medical group better because, you know, when you sometimes used to turn up at facilities and I'd be looking at the poor physio or athletic trainer working on a piece of equipment, for example, that was actually the, you know, the defensive coaches or the attack coaches or the O-line coach or the linebacker coach. And that's where I think my own company, GSI, we sat down and thought, hang on a minute, I think we've got to create a whole range of products that can be used for return to perform because really they sit on their own in between coming out of the medical facility, working on those, then going back on to the field itself with the positional coaches, whether that be in rugby, rugby league, NFL, American football, college football, even into ice hockey. You know, we've talked about that in the past. We've talked about the combat sports, UFCs. We've also looked at AFL. You know, so wherever there are shoulder, you know, problems, challenges. Never like using the word problem, but where there's shoulder challenges and bringing players back from shoulder injury, male and female sport, then we've just got to do it the right way. But we've got to, in my mind, where I come from, is I want to have the correct tools to work on so we're not going live right away. You'll never beat live practice, Ben. I always say this. You will
Mm.
never, ever beat live practice. But there are different ways of getting there, you know? And I think that's what you and I have both sat down and looked at within this framework, that this is about bringing players back from shoulder injuries first. That's the key. That's what we're looking at here.
Yeah, and I love that. It's a challenge, not a problem. I think we've done a really good job of identifying the problem in contact collision sport. But I remember years ago when I was in, you know, Premiership rugby, And there were some brilliant audits done by the RFU, and every year they Julia Hedy's work back in 2008, that some really good papers, really clear, this is the problem, but then the solution wasn't put in place. And years after, it's still the same problem. The top 5 injuries were still the top 5 injuries.
Yeah.
And now that's partly down to the needs analysis of the sport and the physical demands. That's part and parcel of some of the positions that players are getting into. One of the things I see a lot, and one of the reasons for creating our framework and the way it works, moving from sort of control to chaos, if you like, and from low intensity to high intensity, and also working in close to working out wide. One of the reasons we ended up working out wide was because we were talking to Saracens in 2015, and they were finding that athletes were really strong in the gym. They could bench press significant amounts. If you allowed them to stay in close to their body, they could smash any test, no problem at all. And so they'd go out onto the pitch, and within the early contact collision drills on the pitch, the simple stuff, they'd experience symptoms of pain, instability, all the rest of it. So we wanted to try and find a way of kind of quantifying that return and setting some markers of, if you hit this, you earn the right to go to the next level.
Yeah.
The conversation we had when we were doing some filming around this up in Scotland was, and I remember asking you this, Richie, how do you coach athletes to tackle out with a almost in these reach tackle positions? And that was a massive eye opener for me, because what we were physically trying to prepare the athlete for was worst case scenario. We'd seen athletes come in, offensive linemen, who were fine in here, but then as soon as they had to reach out of their normal, they'd have an instability episode or a significant dislocation. I remember you saying, well, we don't coach out wide. That's not ideal. And it sounds so simple, but it was a light bulb moment. And the obvious connection then of making assumptions from our side, physically preparing them for worst case scenario, versus the actual, how do you teach people to tackle to help them protect the shoulder?
Yeah, and you know what? I can remember it because I remember saying it's actually not about out wide, it's about your feet. Because you've got to get your feet into a position where you don't get stuck in that position. And I think this is where it's been great. And both of us have thoroughly enjoyed putting this together, because I think it's tested both of us out. But, I first and foremost rewrote the methodology. So, and it goes back to the 5 fights. And I always talk about this, and it's now used globally. USA Football, National Federation of High Schools, I think it's about 100,000 coaches have gone through it. World Rugby use it. And many others, coaches, players across multiple different contact collision team sports use the methodology, which is great. But the methodology still comes down to track, prepare, connect, accelerate, and finish. And if you look at any, the world of social media now is pretty much, and we're doing it ourselves, it seems to be the way that, you get messages out there. But when you look at most contact collision type social media, it's always the hit, boom, it's the big hit, and that's the sort of the big flashpoint moment. There's so much more to it than that, and I'll come to a point in a minute. Track, prepare, connect, accelerate, finish. 5 things to the tackle. So when I was working with athletic trainers and physios, they were phenomenal when it came to the human body and how it works and how it moves. But at the level they were working at, the first thing they kept saying to me was, I want to know more about the technique, because if I don't understand the technique, then I'm always going to be behind in my knowledge within the sport that I'm in and with this individual. And it dawned on me that Richie Gray knows very little. If you put me into a medical environment, it would be dangerous, because it's not my job. It's not my role. I've not gone through the years of study that you guys have gone through, but I've gone through something different. I went through, 4 years of physical education, then skill acquisition. So we both come from different points of view here, but we both need each other, especially in this part. So the key for me now is, I want to make sure when I leave a building, whether it be in France, the UK, the US, anywhere else in the world, and I'm working with athletic trainers, physiotherapists, medical staff, I want them to have a really good understanding of the methodology of, for example, the tackle, because we've talked about the tackle's pretty much the biggest challenge when it comes to shoulder injury. And I want that staff, I want those professionals to have a really good understanding of the methodology behind the tackle, because taking that with their knowledge, then all of a sudden makes it far more understandable. And also the player enjoys that, because all of a sudden the player's thinking, this person understands the tackle. They're not just medical. And then they can have great conversations with the coaches and the position coaches, because we're all in it together. And that never used to happen. Never used to happen. So let's hope that becomes the norm going forward,
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that, again, listeners who aren't aware of the sort of vast array of equipment that you've put together with your company. One of the things about that, and it's the thought and the detail that's gone into the specifics. I remember we were looking at some of the stages of returning to tackle, and even almost, I think you describe them as the ears, maybe you describe as something else, but on the on the tackle shield,
the protection bands at the side of the shields.
Yeah. So when we're looking at those, I was, what are those? What are those for? I've only ever seen a tackle shield as a tackle shield, and then the different shapes of tackle shield in terms of body position and adjusting height. Can you just kind of, I suppose, talk a little bit to that and some of those technical points that you make around the tackle?
It's interesting, Ben, because I made a mistake as well. I wrote methodology first, and then I started to create the equipment. So I had to understand completely. I ripped up the tackle area. You pretty much ripped up the whole breakdown area in rugby union, body height, positions, angles, force. I spent about 2 or 3 years pretty much not coaching and looking at it so that I could relaunch it again. Because what I was seeing across the world was it being really badly coached, And if it's badly coached, it means the players are being badly coached, and it means the long term, somebody's going to get injured, I always go back to technical accuracy. So rewrote the methodology, and then the minute I'd rewritten the methodology, I went back onto the fields again and started coaching, and I'm thinking, that piece of equipment is not good enough now. It's not heavy enough. It's not the right size. It's not the right height. It's not got grip points on it. It's not got protection for the carrier and the player. So every single piece of equipment goes hand in hand with my methodology. And I never really explained that well enough when I first started. Now everybody understands and listening to things like this and the way we've promoted it. But I was too busy coaching. So I was all over the world coaching, and I didn't have the time to do it. And, I've never been a great social media person, so I'm too busy, to be honest. But, I need to do more of it. It's my fault. But the equipment I've designed goes hand in hand with the methodology. And even in the framework, that we're going to be putting out there, there's about 80 drills in total. It's an incredible amount of drills, but they're for bringing players back from shoulder injury. They're different to the drills I may use if all of a sudden I'm working with Ben Ashworth, he's 100% fit and he's ready to go. Totally different types of drills. So all the drills that I've created and sort of gathered over the last 10 years of doing this are slightly different. There's movement attached to them. There's weighted hands. There's bungees. There's different ways of using the equipment to bring around confidence, because that's key. The player has got to be confident. You talk about the different stages, the different levels within the framework. My player can't move on if they're not confident, I'm happy, coach, it's feeling good, everything's all right. Then back to the medics, they tick the box, we can now move on to the next bit. So I had to create equipment that the staff could use that could literally challenge them throughout the different levels you're talking about. Simple as that.
Yeah, and I think what that does is it actually, when it's done well, that constrains certain aspects of, it doesn't allow for a swinging arm when
No.
someone has to punch their arms through.
Yeah, it forces you, Ben. It actually
Yeah,
forces you to be accurate.
yeah,
And the great thing I love about the kit is a player can use it on their own. A lot of my NFL guys that use it in the off season actually train on their own with the equipment. They might have one person that's filming them, and then they'll send you the tape and you have a look at it and give them feedback. But if you don't use this equipment properly, the equipment will beat you. The great saying, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. Simple as that.
yeah.
So, that's always been a key thing for me. But, and again, I go back to saying this because it's really important, the 80 odd drills that we've created for this program and framework are about coming back from shoulder injury.
So, one of my own experiences, I work as you know with different teams at different levels, but we also try and provide athlete grade care to anybody. And one of the guys that we saw recently was a young prop, um, a pretty good young prop, working down in the West Country. Had a few shoulder surgeries, so I had some bad luck and came to see us. And he went through our framework, which is, earn the right to get back to the sport itself and the technical drills and the progressions. So our phases are pretty clear. We've got our protection phase after surgery. We've then got our rebuild phase where we try and prepare the tissues, the preparation phase where we're trying to give them the physical characteristics to be able to cope with the technical demands. And then it's into return to sport. But the other thing we look at is literally confidence, a questionnaire, a CERSI 5 questionnaire. And on that, although his scores were through the roof when we compared it to our database,
Yep.
his confidence was still in his boots. And one of the things that I saw there and in discussion with him, it was just because he didn't know how, he didn't have the coach handy, maybe the level of access to good coaching.
Yeah.
He had to do it on his own. And he was lacking confidence because he wasn't progressively exposed to the different levels, almost holding his hand on that return to play. And I suppose then, from our side, our framework is progressive and we hit our levels to build confidence
Yeah.
right up until the technical stuff in that return to sport phase. And that's where you come in around the progressions that you use.
Yeah, I've seen it as well, Ben, where strength conditioning coach is saying, look at what he's lifting in the gym now. He's back there. He's back. He's ready. But technically proficient, no, not at all. And I've always had this theory, and it's never been backed up by science. It's just with years of experience. If players that I coach don't do contact and collision work for, if they miss out for 10 to 12 days, I would go 14 days, possibly less than that. The regression's massive, And that's where I can't work out in some sports where the season's finishes at X and they don't hit again for about 4 or 5 months. It's unbelievable. And then, they then wonder why there is, injury at the start of that phase again. Well, it's because they've done no contact collision. Rugby's the same with body height. If you don't train body height continually, players just automatically come back up again because we're not meant to be here, So what I try to do now with players that I'm involved with coming back from shoulder injury is literally, even within the week that they're injured, if we can, we'll try and just keep using movement patterns, which could be as simple as elbows in, wrists above elbows, stay tight, get loaded, and anybody with a shoulder injury can still get loaded, which is into that loaded shape standing because it's not affecting your shoulder, So I'm trying from the very beginning to keep this sort of muscle memory there so they don't lose it. Even get them, and I've done this before, where they're watching video of themselves making great tackles, for example, over and over again. So they're watching it and it's going in through here, it's visual. They're still working on little things where what used to happen, Ben, okay, you'll see him in 12 weeks. We'll have him back in 12 weeks for you. I've heard it before, Yeah, he's going for an op. He'll be out of the system for a while. You'll see him in 12 weeks. So then all of a sudden, I'm trying to get in with you as quick as possible to start working with you. And that could well be just movement principles to begin with. Then all of a sudden, we might add a slight weight on the forearm or the hand, anything to start stressing, as long as it's going hand in hand with you. You keep me under control. And I've always said this about the medical group, and I've said it a number of times in this podcast, I am not medical. So this is where I have to listen to Ben Ashworth. Rich, we're ready to go to this stage now. Okay, bring in bungees, bring in movement. Then after, all of a sudden, we're starting to bring in training aids. And eventually, once we've gone through the whole progression, we will then go live again. But we'll go live to eventually, it's 100%. It's bone on bone. So all of a sudden, the player is back to where they were, and I said it at the top of the show here, even better than they were before. It's just about like a reboot of a computer. You know, you're rebooting the whole muscle memory, movement principles. With that comes confidence. We've talked about it again. With that becomes in here, I'm ready to go. I'm happy now. You can throw anything you want at me. That's how we should be putting our players back into the traffic, you know. But, you know, we could both write books on what we've seen in the past and what, you know, but we didn't know any different. It's no disrespect to anyone that's what they've been doing before. We just didn't know. There's no excuses now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think at the end of that process, you know, you return them to the live fire, you know, the bone on bone. And then we're still keeping an eye on them, you know, so the framework doesn't end there. That the return to play versus return to performance argument, you know, returning them to play isn't good enough. We need them to come back and sustain performance levels and not break down. We need to steal Phil Glasgow's comment. They need to be thriving, not just surviving when they come back.
Yep.
The way we do that is we look at still doing some of our physical tests to see, is there a cost to that return back to the game? And then that's how we monitor, and we put in place a proper comprehensive framework that's going to try and not only build confidence and physical capability and technical skill,
yep,
to make them better, but then also to keep them back above the line, and watch when they're starting to drop off.
And Ben, that's again where, you know, I've always looked at the three key things, and it's methodology, it's technical training equipment, and it's analysis, right? The three go together, and then after that, you coach it. So you've got the methodology, you can always go back to that, and you can say, like, let's look at tracking. Yeah, okay, look at the KPIs. Oh, you know what? We've not discussed this one, or this is the one that this player's maybe needing extra help on. Then we use the equipment in whatever way we want. Then we analyse the player, and the analysis links to the methodology. But that's where I think in the physiotherapists that I've worked with and athletic trainers, they love that part, because the analysis part really lets you know and drills down on the detail. And again, it's linked to the methodology. So everything comes together. You have to have everything. You can't just have one thing. And, you know, your point's so, it's absolutely on the money. Most of the time in the past, a player would come back, there you go, he's ready to go, you know. Right, thank you, well done, Ben. We'll see you later on. He's now with us. And there was no sort of follow-up. It was like, right, he's back in now. He's back with the team. Let's go. What you're talking about now is, no, he's back with the team, but he's going to be continually progressed. And to be honest, Ben, and I've had this discussion with you a number of times, every single player should be on an individualised skills programme. End of. And I've always said this great analogy, and I remember speaking to a very well-known strength conditioning coach in the NFL, and I said, imagine if you took the strength conditioning programme away from the, you know, outstanding linebacker or D lineman that you've got in your group. You took it away and said, we're not going to bother giving you a programme. All hell would let loose, right? Because that programme's like gold, you know. And in all our sports, contact collision, where's my programme? Yeah, I'm on a new programme this week. I've got a progression, or I'm on it for the next 4 weeks or whatever. I never hear them ask for a skills program. You know, they should go hand in hand. Skills program, strength conditioning program, and that would then allow people like yourself, if Richie Gray did get an injury, shoulder-wise, okay, where is he? What does he do well? You know, let's have a look at his skills program over the last 2 or 3 years. You know what? He's always had a struggle on that left side. So you've got to find the history as well. Remember, we don't want to see you again. I want to get you back fit, and I don't want to see you again. So we don't want players reoccurring and coming back, and that goes back to your point. It never finishes, but there's a lot more to it than just your part. We're all in it together, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the same as I would look at the physical stuff. Is what we while we've got someone with us, we've got the opportunity to rebuild, to build confidence, to look at and break down the things into the physical and the technical. From the physical side, what things can they then take from that period of rehab and then put back in as part of their preparation work that then continues for the rest of their life, you know, to protect them ultimately and build some resilience. But it's the same thing with the technical skill stuff is how do we dose in, you know, into a squad?
Yeah.
Like how do we get that into a squad in terms of actual technical proficiency of tackle drills
And Ben, remember, everybody's fighting for time in our world. You know, the higher you go, I hear it all the time. Oh, we've not got enough time. We're struggling for time. In the highest level, it's become so scheme orientated in NFL. In rugby union, it's the same. You know, attack and defence, huge amounts of time spent on the systems. Whereas sometimes we're actually spending less and less time on making players more individually accurate because it's tough. Because every player, as I've just said, is an individual. So if you take 8 guys or 8 girls and group them together, I guarantee every single one of them is going to have slight differences. And that's the challenge, is trying to individualize programs as much as we can so that you're really concentrating on that individual athlete and making them 1, 5, 10% better, you know? And it's a big workload.
it is a big workload. I totally agree. And I think that the evolution of working with a squad is such that, you know, you're going to have to start more general and you're going to end up really individualized. It might take you 3 years to get to that point, you know, but actually with the knowledge we've got around that, we've put in place with the sharp guys at Quins this season, we've put in place some stuff that for time poor athletes, based on our testing, we've then put them into clusters. It's as individualized as it can be based on their testing to try and put in a dose of something in their warm-up that doesn't take up the S&C time. It's a nice preparation drill for that particular session. And we've then, with the guys at Quins who are implementing this, we've seen a real consistency around delivery, the complete buy-in from everyone. The players are enjoying it because they feel like they're getting better, or at least keeping above the line across the season with something that's designed to help their individual problem. And I assume it's the same technically.
Yeah, it's identical. It's identical because you lose technical accuracy very quickly if you don't train it properly, you know? And as I've said already, you can't go live all the time. And now, to be honest, there are laws and there's guidelines on how much time coaches like myself can spend on live practice, you know, and quite right. So you've got to now be clever on how you use your time. And that's where, 10, 15 years ago, training aids were never really used that much. You know, it was like, they had a shield or had a tackle dummy or a tackle bag and that was it. But I think what's happened now is because the time we're allowed to go body on body has come down, we still must be able to create different ways in making our players robust, you know, and making them, again, we come back to the word confident, but the key for me, and I'll always use it, they must be technically accurate. And you can do about 80% of that on training aids, and then the last 20% is your live part, because you have to get ready for that as well. And that's what's going to happen in the game. So, you train the way you play. But laws and bylaws have now stopped us from having, Wednesday afternoon full on an hour and 20, which used to happen, Tuesday night live for an hour, Thursday, an hour and a half. When you think of what we did, but the game's changed, the world's changed, and we have got to make sure that we are keeping our players as healthy as possible, And I've always said to you this, why do we do what we do, Ben? Ideally, for me, and I remember we discussed this down in Orlando last year, I'll judge how well I've done as a coach, not by the medals or cups and trophies. I want to see the players I've coached kicking a ball about with their son or daughter 20 years after retiral. That's how I'll judge how Richie Gray's done, And I suppose there'll be some magic number in the sky when I'm sitting there in my rocking chair, of players that you have, not just me. I look upon all of us that have stopped from getting serious injury, have stopped from, major injuries that have had an effect on the rest of their life. Yeah, we're in a contact collision sport. We understand what we're in. You understand what's happening when you cross the line, but it's our duty to make sure it's as safe as possible, especially in the preparation, especially in that. The laws of the game, whatever game that is, will take care of themselves. We've got to make sure that we're creating athletes that are ready to go when it goes to the 80 minutes or the 4 quarters or whatever.
Richie, that's great. And one of the things I know is you're a busy man. So what's coming up for you in the near future?
Well, I'm still obviously involved French top 14. I go down and consult down there about 7 to 10 days a month, which I love. Obviously, I work slightly differently from everybody else because I'm also linked to American football, NFL as well. So I'm across there 6 to 8 times a year. And also I'm linked to Rehab in the US, the big sports company that look after all my equipment. So that's great. And then GSI takes up the rest of my time. So when I'm not coaching, I'm pretty much involved in things like this. And in some ways just try to make the game better, Ben. That's the key for me. I'm lucky enough to work in contact and collision sport. That's where I want to be. But if I'm here, I want to make a difference. It's as simple as that. So yeah, busy times, rugby union, NFL, GSI, and everything else that's thrown at me as well. So, and yourself?
As you know, pretty similar.
You're multi-sports, Ben. You're multi-sports, not just contact collision.
No, that's right. This is just one component of what we do, but ultimately we're building things to help athletes across, throwing, overhead. But the contact collision burden, is something that firstly we see a lot, but secondly, I really enjoy that challenge.
Yeah,
it's often working with people who, they're not fearful of returning to contact, but they just need to know how, and that's the real challenge. And also just helping teams and organizations support, the teams behind the teams. I can't be everywhere in the world, but how do we build stuff in terms of our models and our frameworks and our systems that are going to be able to provide support to others when we can't be there ourselves?
I think we'll both say now, sometimes life just, sends you on a little pathway, or you sometimes don't know what's going to happen. But, I think the funny thing for me is we've known each other for years, but we actually haven't until we met each other last year. But, I think over the last year, we've both put a lot of work into this, and I just hope that the practitioners out there will really enjoy this. I think it's something different, and they're going to get a lot out of it, and it won't be the last time, because we've already talked about this could be a rolling sort of program. And I always say, especially to governing bodies and groups, when we put out, for example, a course, it should never be one and done, because everything always evolves. It keeps evolving. So the minute you've put something out, we're then looking at the next thing. So I think that's exactly what we've hopefully created here, and it's been great working with you. I know we'll continue to work together, and I've learned a lot from you, over the last year as well. So yeah, great stuff.
Well, I can only echo that. It's been really enjoyable. You know, me, you, some others, Gus and Henry and my team have thoroughly enjoyed working with you. So you know, we're really excited about what's to come, and you know, really grateful for your time today, and of course over the last year in helping us to build this. So fantastic, mate. Here's to the future.
Good man, Ben. Thanks a lot.